It's been an action-packed week in the trial of Erin Patterson, and my colleague Anthony Dowsley is here to give his thoughts on what the jury heard. I'm Brooke Grebert-Craig, and this is The Mushroom Cook. Hi Dows, welcome back.
Thanks, Brooke. Good to be here. Another week, another big week of evidence.
Yeah, so we have just finished week 3 of Erin Patterson's murder trial here in Morwell.
We should start saying that Erin Patterson has pleaded not guilty to the murders of 3 people, being her husband's parents. They are Don and Gail Patterson, and also to the murder of Heather Wilkinson. The other person she's charged with crimes against is Ian Wilkinson and his alleged attempted murder. The prosecution states that in this case, Erin Patterson had an intent to kill, that she has foraged, that she has lied to police about that she has lied to police about a dehydrator that was dumped at the tip, and that she was never sick is the allegation, that she ate this meal but it was prepared so that she could eat off a particular plate and give her guests another plate with death cap mushrooms. The defence say that this has been a tragic accident, that yes, she did lie about owning and using a dehydrator, and yes, she did lie about foraging, but they say this is just a mistake, a tragic meal, and a tragic accident. That's up to the jury to decide whether this is an accident or murder.
So let's talk about what has happened this week. It's been quite colourful, I would say. Let's begin with a juror being discharged.
Well, there's a reason big trials have a jury of 15 members, when only 12 men and women can decide the fate of an accused. And we saw that come into effect on Thursday of this week, as one of the jurors was effectively dismissed. They had to exit stage right. They won't be determining this trial, and that leaves us with 2 spares. And we are probably safe to say we're at the halfway point or round the corner for home in this trial. It's likely to wind up close to, next week or the week afterwards. We're not sure yet. And, I mentioned earlier on in this podcast that there's a rule that jurors need to know. And that is, I referred to a movie called Fight Club. And whatever goes on in Fight Club stays in Fight Club. And jurors should know, and they were told, not to discuss this case with anybody else. And even though there's been no finding that a particular juror did talk outside of the jury room, there's a concern that he did. And Justice Christopher Beale, I think quite rightly, doesn't want any problems with his trial and this case, and he made the decision for him to leave the jury.
And Dows, there's actually another rule for the jury club, for reporters really. We are not allowed to talk to jurors. So we don't know what exactly potentially this juror said, allegedly, to family and friends, and we won't be able to ask him or identify him as well.
So the likelihood is that no one will ever know why this jury member had to go. We've been led into the idea that there's been reports that they did discuss with family or friends some matters within this trial, and that's why they've gone. But there's been cases in the past this has emerged. It can happen for a number of reasons. Jurors can get sick and they basically have to get off this trial, which they've spent weeks on, because they're just not well enough to do it. Notably, in the Bruce Lerman case, there was a mistrial because a juror had been found to be doing their own research, which made national headlines. And of course, talking with people outside of the jury pool or the jury itself is not allowed, and that is a reason that you should not be continuing on with making a verdict in particular when so much is at stake.
And if jurors break this rule, can they be charged?
It's a good question, Brooke. I know that you can be charged in some states for doing research, and breaking the rules. In Victoria, I believe you can, but I've never heard of it happening. Because we never speak to jurors and we don't even really think about doing it, I don't even really remember the faces of the jurors that well. It's never been something I've ever read about. So it would be interesting to know whether this has ever been a charge that's been laid against anybody.
Let's move on now to the evidence that we heard this week. There was a lot of scientific evidence, is that right?
Yeah, they got toxicologists on the stand. We heard about death cap mushrooms and how toxic they are. We also heard about one of the central themes to this trial, which is family and family ties as well during the week. So all of these things that we've been hearing about before are all sort of re-emerging week to week as themes, as different witnesses asked about things that maybe Erin Patterson told them, or what different medical staff and child protection workers and things like that had heard as this all happened back in July of 2023.
And the jury also heard about how toxic death cap mushrooms are. Dowles, can you talk about that evidence?
Brooke, I can tell you this, I will never eat a death cap mushroom after hearing what I heard in this trial. A forensic toxicologist named Dr. Dimitri Gerastimoulis, he gave them the technical names. The one I picked up on was they're known as amatoxins. There's different parts of it. It gets more technical, but I think the cut-through line is that you progressively get worse once you've eaten one. These toxins need to be removed from your system in very timely treatment. So to basically give our listeners an idea, once you've eaten a death cap mushroom, the clock is ticking. So you better get onto it very quickly with medical expertise because they are highly deadly.
And as we mentioned on The Daily Show, the jury were also given lessons on mushrooms, right, Dowles?
Well, the lessons were, apart from not wanting to ever ingest one of these things, the lesson was never eat one of these things. If you see something in the wild, especially under an oak tree, you should be very cautious. We learnt about spores, stripes, colours, and all sorts of different things that make up a death cap mushroom.
We also heard from a child protection worker this week. She gave evidence in regards to what Erin told her while Erin was in hospital, and they really touched more upon the relationship between Erin and Simon.
And this particular topic has been a theme throughout the trial. The marriage that turns into an on and off again separation, that turns into a permanent separation, and then that turns into a tax form that sends their relationship spiralling. And we're talking about a witness by the name of Katrina Cripps, who worked for Child Protection in July 2023 when this all happened. And she visited Erin Patterson in hospital and then again after she was released from hospital. And her story was the story that we've kind of heard before, that Erin Patterson had applied for child support because she was seeking family tax benefits. This is what she told Ms. Cripps, according to her testimony, and that she said that there'd been a change in the relationship with Simon and that she felt that he'd become nasty, and she also felt isolated from the family in more recent times. Ms. Cripps also testified that Erin Patterson told her that her estranged husband, Simon, was controlling and had become coercive in their relationship.
And Erin also told her more about the relationship that she had with Don and Gail.
Ms. Cripps said that Don and Gail, Simon's parents, that she'd cared and loved for them very much, but she also started to feel isolated from them after not being invited to family events, which has come up earlier in this trial. And just on Ms. Cripps' evidence, she testified that on August 2, so this is a few days after the lunch in Leongatha, and about a day after Erin Patterson was discharged from hospital, she told the court that Erin had searched her bank records to find a purchase relating to the Asian grocer, where she originally told the police and others that she had bought mushrooms. What did she say about that in her evidence?
Miss Cripps told the jury that she asked Erin whether she foraged mushrooms, and Erin did not reply and actually looked at her phone.
So she didn't answer her at all. And she couldn't find a record of purchasing anything from an Asian grocer.
We heard more about the dehydrator this week. A Kunwara tip worker took to the stand and gave evidence. The jury saw CCTV footage and also stills from that footage of a woman driving a car, getting out of her car and collecting something from her boot and then moving into a shed that was at the tip.
So this footage, CCTV taken from the tip, was on August 2, so that's about 4 days after the lunch. And we heard about this dehydrator in the opening address to the jury. And the defence has actually admitted that Erin lied to police about dumping her food dehydrator at the tip. She actually told them that that had not occurred and that she didn't own a dehydrator. So, in this footage, as you said, the woman exits the car, opens the boot, and she takes an item out and walks into this shed. And, we know that there was debris found, and from inside this dehydrator, tests were conducted, and they did find there were traces of death cap mushroom in it. And we also heard from a fungi specialist, as you said earlier, a mycologist, is that right?
A mycologist, that's correct.
And her name's Dr. Camille Truong?
Yes, Truong, I think.
Truong. And she was working for the Victorian Poisons Information Centre on July 31, and that's a couple of days after the lunch. And she told the court she was sent a photo by a doctor of the leftovers of the beef Wellington. Now, they are the leftovers that were found in the bin outside the Leongatha house on the premises there. Is that right?
That's right. These leftovers have definitely made a journey through different locations in this case.
And Brooke, there has been evidence about the leftovers and whether they were toxic or not.
Yeah, it's been a little bit confusing in court this week. We've heard from some witnesses that the leftovers of that meal that were given to the guests on July 29, 2023, didn't have death caps in them. But then on the other hand, we've also heard from other witnesses who said that they did. I think it's important to remember that different witnesses are giving evidence on their own expertise.
So the jury also heard from Professor Andrew Burton, and he's an intensive care specialist, and he had examined Erin's medical records and found no evidence that she'd ever been diagnosed with cancer. Now, if we take you back to the start of this trial, we were told by the prosecution that they were alleging that Erin Patterson had told her guests at the lunch that she had a cancer diagnosis, a particular form of cancer being ovarian cancer. The defence actually have a different take on this, though. They're saying that although she may have raised cancer, it was a conversation about suspected that she had cancer. So this will be something for the jury to make their minds up about.
And Dowles, broadly, when do you think the trial will end?
I think that as they're ripping through these prosecution witnesses, they're giving evidence in quick, concise fashion. We are likely to end up not running as long as we thought. It was projected that this trial would go for around maybe 6 weeks or 5 if it was quick. It might end up, the jury could be out before the end of the month to deliberate on this trial and deliver a verdict. So I think that as we get closer and closer to closings, the prosecution will have the first go and the defence will have the last bite at the cherry. But one thing might happen before we get to closing. The defence get the chance to call witnesses towards the end of the trial, after all the prosecution witnesses are said and done. And we don't know yet whether they will call Erin Patterson herself to give evidence about what happened. Brooke, is there any indication about when we might hear whether Erin might be called?
It's definitely up in the air at the moment. We haven't heard anything surrounding that just yet. But I was going to ask you, is it common for the accused to give evidence on the stand during their own trial?
Some of the most memorable trials that I've covered have involved the accused, the person sitting in the dock, getting into the witness box and giving evidence. I know that in the last trial that I did do some reporting on, Greg Lynn, who was accused of killing 2 people, gave evidence on his own behalf, and it was relatively succinct. There was the case of Jason Roberts, and he entered the witness box. And there was also the very famous case of Mick Gatto, and he was charged with killing Benji Venyman at a restaurant in Carlton, and he took the stand and gave evidence which may have been pivotal in him being acquitted. Now, the issue with calling a person accused of crimes to the witness box is not only do they give evidence, first of all, in their examination in chief, they call it, to the defence lawyer, most likely Colin Mandy, who would ask questions if it occurs, but then you open yourself up to cross-examination. And it is largely thought in the legal world that this is a very dangerous position to put yourself in, because you are then tangling with a very, very good questioner who will take you through a lot of evidence, and you don't want to tie yourself in knots. It's up to the prosecution to prove their case. In any case, the person accused of a crime does not have to prove a thing. So that is why it is rare to see people charged with crimes enter the witness box.
Thanks, Dowles.